Hello, welcome back to our channel. Today's video is really touching on something we get asked quite often when we're doing displays, often when we have guests, often when we have open days, and even here on the YouTube channel. Now, people often say to us, what do you feed them on? What do you feed them on, meaning our birds of prey, snakes, and our other animals? So this video is going to be about what we feed our birds of prey and our snakes on. Now, if you're a vegan, you have different issues to everyone else when it comes to keeping predatory animals, because a predatory animal eats other animals. Now, some of those have to eat whole animals, some of them just have to eat some kind of meat. For the most part, our animals need to eat whole animals because just a piece of meat is nowhere near a good enough diet. They need calcium, they need sinew, they need protein from the meat, and some of them actually benefit from eating the feathers, the hoof if you like, the nails, the fur, as part of their digestive system, enabling them to bring up a pellet like many of the birds of prey. It's not actually necessary, but it's certainly part of their metabolism. So if you are a vegan, look away now. If you're a vegan that likes to keep predatory animals such as ferrets and feed them on a vegan diet, definitely look away now. That's not their choice, it's yours. But I know a lot of falconers that are vegans, and they understand that whilst their choice is not to eat an animal product, they understand that obviously if they want to keep predatory animals, they've got to feed them a healthy predator diet. So let's have a look at what we feed them and how it arrives here. Now, if you keep, let's say, one snake or even a few snakes, or even if you breed a small quantity of snakes, because snakes eat a relatively small amount of food compared to warm-blooded animals. So, for instance, reptiles are using the sun's energy or the sun's heat to fuel their metabolism, and they need far less fuel in that to run that metabolic rate than a mammal or a bird. Because for us warm-blooded animals, an awful lot of the food we eat is actually burnt within our system to keep our body at the perfect set temperature. Reptiles don't need that. They need the sun's energy or another heat source to maintain their body temperature at the ambient or the optimum temperature. Now, that means they require far less food. So typically, an average snake might do very well on one suitably sized food item a week. Now, if you're feeding a snake, you're going to feed a lot of mammals, more than likely, for the vast majority of snakes kept in captivity. So you could breed your own rats, for instance, or your own mice, and in a very small space satisfy the demands of a very small collection of snakes. No problem at all. You can breed a lot of rats, but for someone at home, you could breed your own food. Now, ethically, that means you can keep the food, I would say, in nicer conditions than maybe a large farm. It also means you can choose how you kill those animals, because of course if you eat meat, animals have to die, and that's the bare fact, whether we like it or not. If our birds ate just apples and pears and our snakes ate lettuces, that would be great, wouldn't it? But they don't, because they're predators. So ethically you could keep them in a higher standard of living maybe than the base standard that farms have to abide by, but you still got to kill them. And you've got to make that decision how you go about killing them. And obviously, if you're killing any animal, it needs to be as speedy and as painless as possibly you can. Whether that's chickens for us to eat at a fast food chain, or a nice bit of beef on a Sunday. That animal, we would like to think, is killed as humanely and as ethically as possible. So there will be people that will judge this video, because we're going to look at dead animals. And what I will say to all of you, if you're not a vegan and you're judging how we feed our animals, you need to do a real lot of research into the meat that you eat and how that is lived, how it was farmed, and how it was killed. Because here in the UK, I think you'd be quite shocked, sadly, at how a lot of the meat is produced, or at least how it is killed. A lot of the meat in the UK is not killed in a manner that I would like it to be killed, for sure. So let's have a look at the most common food that we feed our birds of prey, a lot of my snakes. Have a look. These boxes, 10 kilos each of frozen day-old cockerels. Now, it says day-old chicks. They are. They're baby chickens. Let's have a look at a couple here. Bless them. So we've got a couple here. They're blast frozen, so they're absolutely frozen solid, but they're not frozen together. They're easily separated. Now, if you look at these, Easter's coming, and you might think, what an awful shame. Where's the Easter bunny, for goodness sakes? Because the Easter chicks are here. These are all cockerels. All of them. All of the chicks that we feed our birds of prey and reptiles are all cockerels. They're all boys. So, for the majority of you watching this video, they're thinking, what a shame. The Easter chickie-wit, frozen solid to be fed to a snake or a bird. The reason they're all cockerels is, of all the millions and millions and millions of eggs that we eat here in the UK, let alone worldwide, are obviously all laid by girls, aren't they? They're all laid by females, by hens. All the chicken, just about, that we eat here in the UK and most of the world are hens. We eat the girls. And the reason we eat the girls here specifically is because they have a different taste. They have far more white meat on them. The cockerels, once matured, have a lot more darker meat, and white meat tends to be preferable. And cockerels are basically an animal that will fight each other. So it's much more difficult to keep a lot of them in a small space, whereas hens, you can keep a lot more of them easier in a small space. So we only eat eggs. We eat eggs which only come from girls, and most of the meat, nearly all of the meat we eat here, is from girl chickens. So what on earth happens to all the boy chickens? Because the laws of averages say, of all the chickens that hatch out of eggs, half of them are going to be boys, half of them, thereabouts, are going to be girls. I'll tell you what happens to them. They hatch out from an egg, they dry themselves off and look great, and somebody comes along and goes, that's a boy, and they get separated out, and they're killed en masse at a day old. They're worth nothing. They're a byproduct of human foodstuff. They are a human waste product. So half of the chickens that hatch out, millions upon millions upon millions, half of them technically get chucked in a bin. They're no good for anything. So big companies tend to come along, they go to the hatcheries, they buy up all the boy chickens, which are technically just going to be rubbish, and they use them in a very good way. They recycle them, and then they sell them on as a product to zoos and collections of all kinds of predatory animals. They come frozen to us. They're a byproduct of human foodstuff, so they're going in the bin anyway. So of course, they're relatively inexpensive. A chick costs us just a few pence each. Keep that in mind as we go through the other food. It's a good foodstuff. Day-old chicks are good quality food for birds of prey and snakes. Anything that's just hatched from an egg though, generally, its calcium to phosphorus ratio is pretty poor. These guys don't have a lot of calcium in them. Their bones haven't calcified yet. In fact, research shows that the most calcium is actually in the yolk sac within this animal. So, day-old cockerels are probably, 2/3 of the diet of our birds of prey and a lot of my snakes for sure, because they're incredibly, incredibly cheap. And when you're running a large collection, whether you like it or not, that figures into how you feed your animals. You want to feed the best quality food for as cheap as possible, basically, don't you? So, very good food, but definitely not a good foodstuff all on their own. We certainly don't think. Like any diet, the more varied, the better it is in general. So we also buy in frozen rats, which, if like me, you really love rats, you really do wish these things would eat apples and pears for sure, because these guys, to a lot of people, are pretty kind of disgusting creatures. Rats. Ugh. Now these are farmed rats, they're not caught in the wild or down the sewers or something. This one, albino animals, I don't know why, don't do anything for me, but wild type looking ones or fancy clothes rats, absolutely fantastic. Again, we buy them in frozen, and they're farmed rats. Incredibly good quality food. One of the better quality food items we can feed our birds or our reptiles for sure. A really nutritious, balanced diet, especially if they've been well fed themselves in their lives. Price wise, a few pence, maybe £1.50. Bigger, a lot more expensive. Put these guys away. We also feed mice. Now, for some of my snakes, and especially birds like our smaller falcons, like the kestrels, and our owls, our small to medium-sized owls, mice really probably are the best quality food we can give them for sure. They'll eat these all day long, but we try and feed them as many mice as possible. Really, really good quality. Far more calcium loading and more vitamins than in one of these. Frozen mice, again, all farmed, and we buy them in frozen, however many we want. These guys here, over 50 pence each. Probably about 4 pence each, I don't know. This is bigger than this. So you can see how the different species of animals that we buy in frozen have different nutritional values and a different costing. Now, we also buy pinky mice. These are baby mice, very gruesome looking indeed. And these are pinky rats, rat pups, baby rats. These are very expensive. In fact, in some pet shops, you'd pay about 70 pence each for these. Luckily, we buy them bulk, frozen, wholesale. They don't cost us that much. Now, you look at these, and it's even worse, isn't it? Because you think, oh, they're baby animals, aren't they? Now, baby snakes and mammal-eating snakes prey an awful lot on baby nests of mammals, don't they? So it's the food they've got to eat. It's their natural food stuff. We buy them in bulk frozen, and these are bred, all these animals, in their hundreds of thousands around the world. Not just for lab animals, but for zoo stock and feed stock for other animals. On top of all this food that we buy in frozen and farmed, so remember the chicks are a human waste product. They're not farmed specifically for animal feed, they're farmed for our feed, and the cockerels are no good. The rats and the mice and quail, so small birds called quail, we also buy those in farmed. Haven't got any here to show you today. We also have wild surplus animals. So for instance, we've got vermin, technically. We've got a frozen rabbit here. Really good food for some of the bigger eagles and vultures and buzzards because they'll eat the whole animal or parts of. So if my golden eagle or one of the yellowtail crebo snakes swallows a whole front leg of a rabbit, it's not only getting the meat on there, it's also getting a huge bone and a massive calcium intake, which is really important. Remember, animals need calcium. My snakes need calcium to grow their skeletons and when they're laying eggs for their eggshell. And now with birds of prey, they metabolize calcium. So if you feed them a really low calcium diet, such as a Dale cockerel, and you work those birds really hard and they fly really hard and they fly a lot, they actually kind of deplete their bodies of calcium. So they need those other animals and the whole bones. Owls don't dissolve the bones. An eagle swallowing the leg of a rabbit, even the thick back leg bone of a rabbit, it will dissolve that bone and digest it fully within about 24 hours. So it's incredible how they can break down those bones. Once upon a time, the humble wild rabbit, an introduced species here to the UK, the humble rabbit was a plague in Britain. Myxomatosis came along in the 50s and nearly wiped them out, and it took then sort of until I was a young man for them to become plague proportions again, but never pre-myxomatosis plague proportions. They'd kind of found a balance in nature in England, although still a huge, huge pest to farm crops, the food we eat. Since then, in the last few years, we've had rabbit VHD, viral hemorrhagic disease, which is brutal on the population of rabbits around the world, and it pretty much annihilated the rabbit population in Britain. Not everywhere, certainly in Northamptonshire, almost wiped them out to tiny numbers. Thankfully, this year, 2020, 2021, the numbers are showing signs of recovering and outbreeding this disease at last. So once a really easy to acquire staple diet for our bigger birds and all our birds really is now in much shorter supply, and as falconers ourselves here at the Falconry Centre, we haven't hunted rabbits for years because we don't want to put any pressure on this really low ebb of the population. But where pockets are high, where they're causing crop damage again, people we know are ferreting them, and luckily for us in this dire times financial difficulty, we're getting a lot of rabbits to feed our bigger birds for sure. If you keep pythons and boas, they'll eat them. I don't really, so I don't need them for my snakes. We've also got probably the worst verminous pest species now in the British Isles is the beautiful wood pigeon. These guys here are equivalent to flying rabbits, aren't they? You can control rabbits on your land because they kind of live there, and you'll get a few influx from land nearby. These are worse. These are like giant locusts, aren't they? These now turn up in their hundreds of thousands to eat the farmers' crops, our food, en masse. And of course, they don't live on your ground, do they? You scare them and they fly away. They come back another day, or they go to another of your fields. These now in Britain are in plague proportions. It's amazing how just in one lifetime the humble wood pigeon has become not only a garden bird, but a much bigger problem species for farmers' crops. Obviously for us, we only need them if they're steel shot. If these have been shot with lead shot, that is then poisonous to the birds and animals we feed them to. So here on the estate, it's a steel shot only policy. Steel doesn't poison our animals. Critically as well, should any be winged and survive and not get picked up, when they're then eaten by the natural predators like the buzzards and the kites, you're not getting secondary poisoning of the lead shot there because it's been shot with steel. So we're feeding these at the moment instead of farm quail because they cost us nothing. In fact, the guy that shoots these is so ethical, although the farmers asked him to have a couple of days on the pigeons to try and keep them off of his crops, he won't shoot them unless he's got a source for them. So unless we've got freezer space for our birds, he won't shoot any. He said, I'm not shooting and killing animals to just throw them away in the hedge. They've got to have a use, be recycled for sure. So I like the way that guy thinks, because that's how we think when we go hunting for things. We won't kill stuff unless it's going to be fed to our animals for sure. So wood pigeons, high quality meat. This meat is really, really dark. It's almost like a game meat, really full of calories for our animals. The downside is, of course, you're feeding wild birds to our captive birds. It's what they eat in the wild, but the wild's tough, remember. Things die in the wild, things get diseased in the wild, far more than captivity. By freezing them, we kill off any internal parasites that could be passed up the food chain to our birds, but it doesn't kill off viruses. You can't freeze and kill a virus, you just put it into suspended animation. So these get a disease called pigeon herpes virus. They don't all carry it, but of course we do run a slight risk of passing that on to our birds. Any foods we use, there's always some kind of risk. So if we buy in frozen farmed quail, they can actually carry diseases that can at times impact on our captive birds. So there are issues with feeding wild game. At the moment we're judging that the issues insufficient worry to our needs at the moment to feed these animals. So great source of food. And again, of course, in the shooting season or the falconry season, we catch a lot of pheasants and sometimes French partridge. So the same thing applies to these. If they've been shot with lead shot, they're a high risk of poisoning our own birds. Again, steel shot. Hopefully no one else has shot it and pricked it with lead shot elsewhere and it's flown over the field boundaries, but steel shot's the way to go. To be quite honest, these things, I mean, they are absolutely stunning. I mean, these are a non-native species that have become naturalised in Britain now for hundreds and hundreds of years for shooting. One thing for sure, you've got an almost tropical animal, and they're all different. Pheasants are absolutely stunning, and if you see them in the spring this time of year, the cockbirds displaying in the spring sunshine, beautiful animals. And you know, we feed them to things. I eat meat. That doesn't mean you can't appreciate that they were once living things. They needed to be treated with respect for sure. And look at the iridescence, absolutely stunning. Do I eat meat? Yes. Do I like killing animals? Never. It's a paradox that non-hunters, and especially people like vegans, probably can't understand. And of course, everyone's got their own morals and ethics to work with. We choose to keep and conserve and educate people of a variety of predatory animals. We have to feed them other animals in one form or another. That's just the way it is. So wild take, wild harvest, farm bred, mice and rats and quail, and then we've also got human waste product, the cheapest of all, the least probably nutritional value but pretty good food, the day-old cockerels. So that's really the essence of what we feed our animals. But of course we keep amphibians, we keep reptiles such as small lizards, and they're often fed things like farmed insects, crickets and mealworms, with added vitamins and minerals, And of course, one of the most nutritional things you can feed a lot of these small exotic animals is the humble earthworm. It's one of the most nutritional things that you can feed things. And of course, you can buy them. We tend to take a spade. No, we don't. I try and delegate. Someone else takes a bucket and spade and they go and dig them up to feed to our captive newts, which again are used for conservation through education. One thing I thought I'd better add to this video is there's been an interesting kind of side note that needs to go in here that's been going on that we know of as Falconers now for certainly the last few months, and that is that a lot of the hatcheries in the EU have now are developing, and in fact they're being forced to develop technology where they can tell the sex of the embryo within the egg at something like 10 days old, but at a few days old. That means they can destroy that egg, which means they don't need to spend time and money hatching it. And it's not actually a hatchery decision. This is, I think, being forced upon them in a way to try, like as an animal rights thing, to reduce this wastage of the day-old cockerels, which are not used. So basically they're sort of saying if we kill them as an egg, it's more ethical than killing them as a hatchling. So of course, here in the UK, we're now leaving the EU. Whether we'll follow suit, who knows? But certainly in the future of the reptile industry, zoos, animal keeping, falconry, anything to do with predatory animals that get fed a reasonable amount of day-old cockerels, again because they're a human waste product at the moment, that might have an impact on them. Now, whether that'll happen here in the UK, whether the UK suppliers of these things will source their day-old cockerels from further afield, which is kind of counterproductive to the natural world, I guess, but outside the EU, who knows? So certainly something to do is watch this space regarding the day-old cockerel and how our feedstuffs, if you like, how our animal feed is impacted on that. So we'll keep informed as and when we find out more about this ongoing research and development. I hope this video has kind of given you guys that ask us an insight into what we feed our animals, where the food comes from, and why we feed them what we do. And something from my school educational talks I've noticed across the board in the UK is kids mostly do not know what meat is or where it comes from. So my classic one is they know what a chicken is because they eat it, but they don't know what a chicken is. Most kids in the UK today don't know that a chicken is a bird. Seriously. If you're an adult and you've got kids, for goodness sakes, educate them. If you feed your kids and your family on meat, whether it's chicken nuggets or fish fingers, for goodness sakes, educate them of where the meat comes from and let them decide and think about that. It's really important because in the UK, most of us, not all of us, but we're removed from having to go out and catch and kill and prepare our own meat. So it's almost hypocritical, isn't it? If you eat meat or you feed meat to your family and they don't know where it comes from or how it was sourced, how it was killed even, it's kind of hypocritical. You need to, I think if you eat meat, you need to take a bit of responsibility for the animal that you guys are eating yourselves. Catch up soon. Who knows what video's next? Keep an eye on the channel. Comment below any questions at all.